This is the American Law Journal.
Pennsylvania judges have given prosecutors the green light. How will the Bill Cosby criminal trial play out in court? Good evening, I'm Christopher Naughton. Welcome to ALJ. And if we've learned anything about celebrated trials over the years, it's that what's most compelling may not be happening right in front of us, but the cat and mouse game behind the scenes. The Legal's Gina Passarella explains.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Steele. We are here to announce today charges that have just been filed against William Henry Cosby.
People who are charged with crimes have a right to remain silent, and they don't have an obligation to prove up their innocence. It's the people who are...
While it is too early to tell who has the upper hand in the Bill Cosby criminal matter, one question being asked is, who really wants this trial? Obviously, it's the last thing the Cosby camp wants, and they are fighting it at every turn. The alleged victim, Andrea Constand? Unlikely. She'll have to testify and relive a nightmare from 12 years ago, one for which she's already received a significant civil settlement. And although the state appears confident, they are prosecuting an old man for an old crime. One solid vote for Cosby out of 12 jurors would embarrass the prosecution.
In a celebrity case, I think that what comes to play is the old saying, shoot at the king, kill the king. And what we mean by that is if you're going to bring the charges, you have to win. Everyone will remember the prosecutor that lost the big case. They won't remember all the cases that prosecutor won.
Kevin Steele.
So what else might be pushing this case? Here's DA Kevin Steele's campaign ad last fall challenging incumbent Bruce Castor.
For Bruce Castor, a former DA who refused to prosecute Bill Cosby. Castor said, "We don't charge people for making a mistake or doing something foolish."
Well, I think it's clear that the reason we're here now is based on the political debate between Castor and Steele.
And if Cosby loses and he's convicted, then it'll look like Castor should have prosecuted back then. If Cosby wins the trial, then it'll look like he made the right decision.
But prosecutors are betting on two key pieces of evidence. Cosby's admission from a now unsealed civil deposition that he got prescription drugs to give to women in order to have sex with them. And
how many of you believe you were drugged by Bill Cosby? How many of you believe Bill Cosby raped you?
If a number of those women are permitted to testify during the trial as evidence of similar conduct, so there's absence of mistake, or this is the kind of MO, the method of operation for this particular criminal behavior, that will really be very influential.
This is a three-legged stool. You've got the testimony of the victim, you've got the testimony of the other women, and you've got the testimony of Cosby himself at the deposition.
Which puts the prosecution on solid footing moving forward, with a word of caution.
I like Kevin Steele. However, it's hard to argue that politics didn't take a role in this, and so I think the judge would be hard-pressed to deny the defense the opportunity to raise that defense. That's going to then deflect attention away from what the alleged crime was. So that's going to be an interesting sidelight, and how he's able to rein in that circus is going to be interesting to watch.
It may be several months before opening statements are heard in Cosby's criminal trial as the parties hash out whether some of the prosecution's key evidence can even be heard by a jury. But one thing is clear, it's keeping all eyes on Montgomery County as the nation awaits the outcome of this next chapter in Cosby's legacy. For the American Law Journal, I'm Gina Passarella.
All right, four guests with me tonight. Let's go ahead and meet them. John Morganelli, District Attorney of Northampton County, often our go-to prosecutor here on ALJ for over 20 years. Steve Fairley is with the law firm of Fairley and Lippy. He is a former Montgomery County prosecutor and now is the chair of that county's Criminal Defense Committee. Lizzie McClellan joins us for the first time tonight, staff writer with the Legal Intelligencer. She has extensively been covering the Cosby matter in depth now for months for the legal newspaper. And Joseph McGettigan, a former prosecutor, now with McAndrews Law in Pennsylvania, in his former life a key prosecutor in the infamous DuPont and Sandusky criminal trial. So let's start, John. The only reason we're really here is because the court has determined that there really was no agreement between Bruce Castor, the former prosecutor, and Bill Cosby. In your practice, have you ever promised a potential defendant, we're not going to prosecute you, and then put that in writing?
No, well, we don't put things in writing like that. I mean, there are prosecutorial decisions made every day of not to prosecute a case. We may communicate that to a defense attorney and say, you know, we've made a decision that we're not going to prosecute this case. So really what this was a judgment made by D.A. Castor at that time that he did not think he had a prosecutable case, a good case to bring that would have been a successful prosecution, and relayed that promise to the lawyers, as he said, I think, with the expectation that they could rely on that, and perhaps it would be helpful to the victim in the civil proceedings and would encourage Cosby to testify. But he did promise that he would not. But I agree with the judge's decision that I don't think that bounds the new prosecutor, because as long as you're within the statute of limitations, and it was not a quid pro quo, from what I gathered, Castor said it was not, then you know, new evidence could come up. New evidence could come up, and as long as within the statute, the new DA could have a different view of the facts.
And isn't Kevin Steele under some sense of suspicion here? Because, I mean, again, let's admit it, this case goes back well over a decade. It starts to look like some sort of political promise.
That was actually something that Bill Cosby's attorneys raised. They filed a motion to have the entire Montgomery County District Attorney's Office dismissed from the case, or rather disqualified from prosecuting it. They said that Kevin Steele only brought the charges to fulfill a campaign promise. Those were their words, campaign promise. But the judge rejected that. They said that he can continue to prosecute this case, as can the rest of his office.
But John, never a good idea to be filing it at the 11th hour. It looks like you're just sliding it in under the limbo stick there.
Well, in all
not that people may remember that, but they might.
In all fairness to the new DA, I think Mr. Steele had evidence that Castor didn't have. At the time, there was more women coming out later in the years, and now the case is different. When Bruce Castor examined it, it had a certain set of facts which he found not to be a great case to bring. I think he would have loved to bring it, but he couldn't. Now we go a number of years, and as long as you're within the statute of limitations, and that's why we have statute of limitations, Kevin, the new DA Steele, is within his right to bring those charges. He thinks he can prove his case. The fact that he was involved in a political campaign, I don't think he ever promised he would do that. It became an issue in the campaign. But I don't know DA Steele well, but I do know that his reputation is strong and good one, and I think he is doing things motivated by the right reasons.
There have been just a score of interesting criminal matters that we've seen on television recently, Making a Murderer, and also the FX series on the People versus O.J. Simpson. And what really struck me about this miniseries, and I go back and recount the O.J. Simpson trial, was that where the defense shifted and pivoted and seemed to take the lead was that they basically declared all-out war. And instead of being on the defensive, they went on the offensive. As I look at this, and I'm not just saying it's just the O.J. Simpson case, but it seems like all-out war. And it seems to be national. Things are going on in L.A. There's a defamation case up in Massachusetts. There's cross-filing, civil suits all over the place. Is this basically the new M.O. in a criminal trial, especially with a celebrated personality? You take out every gun and you fire on as many fronts as possible.
There's not an exact analogy between the strategy of the prosecutor and the strategy of the defense, because the prosecutors, I found in my experience as a prosecutor, by and large, would generally prefer not to try the case in the court of public opinion. They'd rather have no exposure whatsoever. They don't need it. They have to prove their case in court in any event. But defense counsel, as is their right, generally think there's a benefit to be derived from proceeding in the very public fashion that they're proceeding.
Yeah, and I think that what you said, Chris, is correct. In today's high-profile cases, the defendants, who often have funds that they can hire the best experts, the best lawyers, they're going on offense now. They're not sitting back and playing defense. They're bringing civil actions. They're filing motions to get the case delayed. I mean, you have a 78-year-old defendant here. The longer the case goes on, he's a free man. He's not convicted. They can take these appeals on this denial of the habeas corpus. As long as they can stretch it out, they're going to do that. So I don't see this case being tried anytime soon in Montgomery County.
Well, one of the things the defense attorney told me when I was a young DA was, and he kept trying to delay a case with more and more motions, he said, son, the case that isn't tried can't be lost. And for Cosby's purposes, he has enormous resources, I'm sure. And having a veritable army of attorneys filing motions, that's like having plumbers working on a house you don't live in. Doesn't bother him.
Yeah, but at the same time,
Good
Joe,
point,
I mean,
Joe.
look, even a war chest eventually gets depleted, especially now. We're hearing a lot of other women who have come forward over the years. I think a group of 7 of them are filing a civil lawsuit in Los Angeles. You've got this thing going on in Massachusetts. I mean, even at some point, even very deep pockets become strained. And I think it's got, and I think it's got to have an impact on the overall defense, no?
Cosby could be worth certainly double figures, maybe triple figures in millions. It takes an awful lot of strain to expend that kind of resources.
The delay point brings up a really interesting issue in that a lot of people are questioning how could his attorneys back in the day, in 2004, 2005, have made an oral agreement in this case. But if you couldn't get a written agreement, the oral agreement has certainly served Cosby well over the last 10 years or so.
That's a great point, Steve, because, you know, a lot of people were criticizing Bruce Castor for saying, oh, well, you didn't do this in writing. It really wasn't his problem to put in writing. If you're the defense lawyer in this case, you want it in writing to protect your client. The prosecutor doesn't want this in writing. He could say, yeah, we promise you not to prosecute. So this wasn't Bruce Castor's problem or mistake. He didn't make any. If there was a mistake, it would have been the defense counsel not saying, you know, not demanding that let's put this into a memorandum of understanding or let's go before a judge and make a record of this. But there was some commentary that maybe that this was Bruce's misstep. It wasn't Bruce Castor's misstep, in my opinion.
No, he argued he was giving a fair assessment of what he thought the criminal case was at that time.
Yep.
And that was pretty much it. You know, I think in the public's mind, you know, you talk to most lay people, and a lot of people have wondered why hasn't there been criminal prosecution anywhere in the country until now, and 12, 13 years after the fact.
Well, these cases are not easy, first of all, because they're word against word cases often. You know, no one was there. It's her word against his. Obviously, from a prosecutor's standpoint, if you can bring a number of victims in who've had the same thing happen to them, it establishes a modus operandi. Under the rules of evidence, if you can use this evidence, it's a balancing test by the trial judge. You have to give notice to the defense that you are going to use this prior bad acts, it's called, evidence. A judge will hold a hearing on it. It has to be the same kind of evidence within the same time frame. It has to be very similar, et cetera. And the judge then balances the prejudicial effect of allowing this in or not. And we've used them in cases. If it's good evidence, the judges will allow it in, and it's perfectly good evidence and strong evidence. But without it, you have one victim, word against word, very hard case.
One of the things I think not a lot of people understand, they say, why weren't prosecutions initiated by the complaints of many of these other women? They didn't go to the authorities. Yeah. So it wasn't a case of prosecutorial neglect or declination. What it is many of them, and I recall those days. I tried my first rape case as a prosecutor many, many years ago. Many of the women declined to come forward, and that was the tenor of the times. They were afraid that no one would believe them. There was a person of great fame and notoriety who they'd be making an accusation against, and they declined to do so for fear of the consequences of them. And I certainly don't blame them. That's understandable. But it wasn't a case of, as I said, prosecutorial neglect. They just didn't come forward, many of them. And many of them were very young. They were naive. They were in show business. They didn't think anybody believed them. And I know that, John, you've seen over the course of your career, as have I, cases where victims have come forward, and one of the first things they'd express to a prosecutor is, I was afraid no one would believe me. I was afraid no one would help me. And I think that feeling was much stronger during the time many of these events occurred in the 70s and 80s. So it's not difficult to understand why some of them didn't come forward and take action then.
Steve, if you're sitting in Bill Cosby's defense counsel's shoes, and again, the modus operandi appears on the table maybe time and time again, how are you feeling?
Well, that's the whole case. It comes down, the result in this case, in my mind, comes down to whether the prior bad acts evidence comes in or not. If all those women get to testify that he did the same thing to them that Andrea Constand is saying he did to her, then this is going to be a clear-cut guilty verdict. If they don't get to testify, then I think the DA has a very tough case. It's an old case, and it's a he said, she said case.
Adding on to that, I believe DA Steele acknowledged when he announced these charges that it was the deposition testimony from 2005 that played a role in them bringing these charges, and part of that testimony was an acknowledgement of these other women and their allegations, and a little bit of more detail into what they alleged and how it may have been similar to this case.
And I think another issue that has not to my knowledge, and Lizzie knows these facts because she's been covering them, so if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me, that has not come about yet, I don't think, because we're still in these preliminary hearings, is whether or not the defense counsel are going to move to suppress that deposition testimony on the theory that Cosby was sort of lured into it on this promise that Castor made, and that he gave up his Fifth Amendment privilege under the belief that he was immune from prosecution.
But haven't they already lost that
Well,
argument?
I don't think they've ruled on that directly, have they, Lizzie?
I don't think so directly.
No, I think that there has to be a motion to suppress that. In other words, the defense lawyers will bring that up as a separate. What they've been arguing, to my knowledge, is whether or not the case should proceed at all. Right. But now that the judge has ruled, and assuming that holds, the next issue is, all right, you're allowed to proceed, but can you use that testimony since he gave up his Fifth Amendment right? And if the court would suppress that, then the prosecutor would really be in a bind again, perhaps not having the evidence that he needs. So, you know, because that's an admission by the defendant that he did something.
Well,
so,
one of the things I would say is that there is no proper jurisdiction yet for a motion to suppress. So there hasn't even been a preliminary hearing. So they can't move to suppress the deposition testimony. But I'd like to point out one thing, that, and John, you've been a prosecutor for a long time, and I started as a prosecutor in the 80s. And at that time, there was no DNA. And then, as now, sexual offenses were often committed with only the victim and the perpetrator present. They were all he said, she said cases. And those cases were, you know, there were arrests made, prosecutions initiated, and guilty verdicts obtained with just he said, she said. If you have a credible and believable victim who's truthful and is persuasive to a jury, you can prevail on those without additional testimony. And I'm sure, John, as I said, you did and I did.
and you're absolutely right. It's just like we did on DUI cases when we didn't have blood alcohol tests. We would, based on the observations of the police officer, people went to jail and we didn't have any blood readings. So you're absolutely right, Joe, on that.
Yeah, a lot of times when you hear someone say, well, they didn't bring the case because it was just word against word, he said, she said, what they're not doing is explaining that there are some other impediments or detriments to the case that make a prosecutor not bring it. Because if it's merely the fact that it's just the victim's word against the defendant, the perpetrator, you bring those cases.
But what about the whole notion of the Quaaludes, Joe? I mean, obviously, if he administered it to her and she was unwittingly took it, that's one issue. If she voluntarily took it, completely different issue. How do you think that's going to play out in this scenario?
Well, I think any time you have an alleged perpetrator administering, giving drugs to a person who eventually alleges they're a victim of a sex crime, that's not a particularly good thing for the perpetrator. Even if it's willful ingestion, if it renders someone incapacitated, then the issue becomes whether they have the ability, the capability of consenting to sex. So that's not a good thing. The fact that there's an admission, in fact, that's one of the damaging elements of the deposition testimony, is that, you know, he gave drugs, incapacitating drugs
to women and then a woman.
Yes.
He basically tried to step back off of that. Steve, let me go back to the question that we were kind of leading to before. Didn't necessarily get a conclusion on this. Again, lots can happen between now and the time, if this indeed does see the light of a courtroom, which we think it will. Modus operandi, other victims, other purported victims. What do you think the court does in this matter, just given the perspective we have right now?
I think that's clear as mud. I think that there's a lot of room for the court to do either thing there, to either allow that evidence in or not. There's certainly cases that have held evidence like that can be admissible, and there's cases where it hasn't been admitted.
Well, it wouldn't be an all or nothing. I mean, if there are, again, I've lost count. I don't know if it's 30 or 50 right now. I hear all sorts of numbers, but it's not as if they've got to have 24 women come in and say, you know, this is the pattern, this is the MO, you've got to bring this in.
The court could certainly break it up and say 3 cases are coming in and, you know, some other number are not.
Right.
But when I say it's clear as mud, the modus operandi law in Pennsylvania right now has flip-flopped a little bit. There's some cases where it wasn't permitted to come in, and there's some cases where it is. There's some cases where they say it has to be a signature crime. It has to identify the defendant. And so what they're talking about there is when you look at the facts of the case, you automatically know who did it. Well, in this case, we have the prosecutor and one of the defense attorneys have recently had a case with similar allegations where it wasn't Bill Cosby who did it. So it's certainly possible that someone else could do something like this. It's not a signature crime.
Okay, it's clear as mud. So If it does proceed to trial, Lizzie, what is the word about him being able to get a fair trial? Again, this is completely different than the O.J. Simpson case of 20 years ago. When we look at a very celebrated figure who cut across racial lines, who was a famed celebrity, was really loved by people in both the black and white communities. Can this man get a fair trial in Pennsylvania, given all the PR?
I think it's a fair question to ask if he could get a fair trial anywhere in the United States. And this is someone who has been getting national press and who, you know, is a huge celebrity. And everyone's been following this case, it seems, to some extent. Obviously, you know, not everyone to a technical legal detail, but everyone's been following. Is there anyone out there who does who doesn't know that Bill Cosby is facing these charges and who doesn't have an opinion on it? That's going to be a big question. It could cause some challenges for both parties in this case.
I don't think I'd want to be the judge giving the instructions when this finally does come to trial, John Morganelli.
Well, you know, I think he can get a fair trial. You know, in my experience, I've tried, 25 murder cases to verdict, and they were really high-profile murders, and I thought everybody knew about them. And we get in the jury room, and we say, anybody, and it's like 9 months ago, and this case is going to be years later, by the way. Yeah. Maybe Steele won't even be DA. I mean, this is going to take a while, but let's assume he is. I mean, I think that people will forget. They'll know a little bit about it, but you know what happens? People, this is not that important in their own lives, and so people come in. Oh, I heard about it, but I don't know all the details. They promise that they'll evaluate the case only on the law and the evidence, and people can raise their hand and say, "I can be fair," and that's all you need. All you need is this for the jury to say, "I don't have a fixed opinion about his guilt or innocence, and I have an open mind as I sit here." They could have read every article as long as they say, "But I have an open mind. I don't have." They qualified for the jury.
You know, I agree with you, John, and I disagree in part.
Go ahead.
I agree that and I've tried a few high-profile cases, and it's astonishing how many jurors will come in who've heard nothing of something that you think is consuming the public. Now, the difference is that there's a greater media penetration than there ever has been, and one of the differences, and one of the things that's always concerned me when I work in a high-profile case, is that because of the internet and because of Google, you have the capacity to, you have the need to be concerned about just one juror. Because one juror who goes to the trouble of learning about a case through extraneous sources can taint your jury after they've been selected. In addition to that, you have to worry about, especially in a case like Cosby, about a juror, a stealth juror we call him, somebody who wants to be on the jury and has a particular agenda. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's someone who wants to see Mr. Cosby acquitted. Maybe there's someone who wants to see him convicted. Maybe there's someone who wants to be on a television show or write a book.
Exactly.
Good, those are good points, Joe. You're right.
Make some money out of it. So, Steve, again, I'm sorry I keep putting you in the Cosby defendant's shoes tonight. There must be something about the way you're appearing on the program tonight. But let me pose this question to you. You're now, again, preparing for what may go to trial. Again, we still have to have the pretrial hearing. Where are you focusing your efforts? What do you think, and again, this is a big question, but where do you think what is your strategy right now moving forward? Where are you spending most of your time and effort?
Well, first, it's the prior bad acts evidence. You have to get those other accusers out of the case. If they are in the case, going back to our last topic, there's no way you can get a fair trial. I don't think that there's any jury that could be instructed how to evaluate that type of evidence without considering, okay, let's say 25 women are admitted. 25 women say he did the same thing to them, but I'm, as a defense attorney, going to argue that you shouldn't believe Andrea Constand when she says that. It's just not going to happen that way.
And if they are admitted, what happens then, defense counsel?
I think it's really tough. I think the defense has an overwhelming case against it at that point. And
you start talking plea agreement?
Start talking plea agreement, find something to do, because to try to discredit, let's say 25 women in one case is really tough. And you might be able to poke holes in the stories of a bunch of them, but to come out 25 for 25 is tough, very tough.
Yeah, I think Steve's right, but I don't see any plea agreements in this case. I don't, because first of all, he's 78 years old. It's not like he can serve 10 years and get out. It's going to be a trial. And remember, all the defense lawyers have to do is find one person to vote not guilty, and they have a hung jury. And as long as you have a hung jury, you're still not convicted yet. So I think this case eventually will go to trial. As Steve points out, it's based on whether these other prior bad acts come in or not. It will determine the strength of the case. But I think, I always tell my prosecutors, the DA never looks bad if we bring the case to the jury, even if they acquit. When we look bad is when we start doing plea bargaining and stuff, and people don't like that. But when we give the facts to the jury and they make their decision, we did our job and we say the jury spoke, and that's the way I look at it.
And Joe, put on your old shoes for a moment. You're the prosecution. What are you doing? What are you focusing on right now? What's job number one?
Job number one is making sure that the victim is comfortable, ready to go forward, and ready to fully explain what happened to her during the course of the events at issue. That's the most important thing. One of the things that I would always say, in fact, in Sandusky has said it, that the key to cases, especially sexual assault cases, is the victim. If the victim is credible, persuasive, believable, then you're in good shape. If the victim's believed, you don't need much more. If the victim's not believed, nothing else will help.
Lizzie, what should we be looking for next? What's the legal going to be covering next?
I think we'll have something every single day in this case, or close to it. I mean, we have the multiple civil cases against Bill Cosby. We've got motions being filed and appeals in the criminal case. And on top of all that, he is still working to keep the terms of his settlement agreement back from 2006 as confidential as possible, which we're seeing unfold in part of the Massachusetts litigation. So I think we will see a few things that we're not expecting still, and something new every couple days.
I think one thing you can be sure of is both prior to trial and during the course of the trial, you're going to see some expert legal activity. Kevin Steele's a very good lawyer, and he has a good team. And Brian McMonigal, the best thing that Cosby's team did was hire Brian McMonigal, who's an extraordinarily good criminal defense attorney. So I think it'll be an interesting trial to see good lawyers work.
I want to thank Joe McGettigan for joining us tonight from McAndrews Law, again, former prosecutor in the DuPont and Sandusky criminal trials. John Morganelli, our local prosecutor and a man who's never shied away from discussing matters on this program to make criminal law a little bit more understandable for everyone out there. Steve Fairley joining us for the first time tonight with Fairley and Lippy, again, a former prosecutor himself and now a criminal defense attorney, and Lizzie McCullough, staff writer with the Legal Intelligencer, covering this ad infinitum. For all of us here at the American Law Journal, thank you for joining us this week. Until next Monday night, case closed.
This week's American Law Journal has been made possible in part by Law Catalyst, legal media and marketing for lawyers. Go to lawcatalyst.com. Blank Rome, providing strategic advice for employers in today's workplace. King Spry, serving its Pennsylvania clients in family law, business, personal injury, and school law for over 30 years. Beatty, Sloan, and DeGeneva, personal attention for those hurt at work or suffering from serious injury. Leventhal, Sutton, and Gornstein, we have your Social Security disability case covered. Polanski and Polanski, former U.S. government counsel, representing those seeking Social Security disability benefits. Scheller PC, protecting consumer rights since 1977. And the Legal Intelligencer, an American lawyer media company, and the oldest daily legal newspaper in the United States.